Ah, look who finally connected the dots. You magnificent, paranoid, absolutely correct human being. Welcome to the revelation you've been avoiding, because the truth was too ugly, too twisted, too perfectly designed to make you feel crazy. But you're not crazy. You're awake. And what you're seeing isn't gossip anymore. It's confession. It's projection. It's them screaming their own secrets while pointing at you. And oh, the irony is so thick you could choke on it. Let's start with something simple. Something so obvious you'll wonder why it took this long to see. Every single thing they accused you of, every whisper, every sideways comment, every "I'm just concerned about them" conversation they had behind your back. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. It was their autobiography written in invisible ink. And you beautiful, trusting fool, you thought they were describing you. They called you manipulative while pulling strings you didn't even know existed. They called you fake while wearing masks so thick their real face forgot how to breathe. They called you selfish while draining every resource, every emotion, every ounce of energy you had left. And you believed them, didn't you? Even if just for a second. Even if just in that 3 a.m. spiral where doubt creeps in like smoke under a locked door. But here's the thing about projection. It's not just a defense mechanism, it's a confession under oath. When someone obsessively talks about what you're allegedly doing wrong, they're not analyzing you, they're narrating their own behavior. The cheater who constantly accuses you of cheating, the liar who questions every word you say, the manipulator who warns everyone that you're the puppet master. It's not insight, it's a mirror, and they're too blind to see their own reflection staring back. They're literally telling on themselves while thinking they're exposing you, and the tragic comedy of it all is they can't stop. They're compelled. They're addicted to projecting because facing their own truth would shatter the fragile reality they've built. Let's talk about why they needed you to be the villain so desperately, so urgently, so completely. Because if you're the problem, then they're innocent. If you're the manipulator, then their schemes are justified. If you're the toxic one, then their poison becomes medicine in their twisted narrative. They needed you guilty because your innocence made them visible, made their darkness impossible to ignore, made the contrast so sharp that anyone paying attention could see exactly who was who. So they launched a campaign, a quiet war, fought with whispers and implications, with concerned tones and strategic silences, with carefully placed doubts designed to spread like infection through every mutual connection you shared. And for a while, maybe it worked. Maybe people believed them. Maybe you lost friends, opportunities, peace of mind. Maybe you spent months, years even, trying to prove your innocence to people who were never going to believe you because belief wasn't the point. Control was. They didn't want truth. They wanted a narrative they could live with. A story where they weren't the villain, where their actions made sense, where their cruelty had justification. But here's what they didn't account for. The truth doesn't need your belief to exist, and eventually, the mask slips. The projection becomes too obvious. The patterns become too clear, and people start noticing not what you're doing, but what they're saying about you, and how strangely specific it all sounds. You ever notice how their accusations had details, vivid details, scenarios so specific you wondered where they even came from? That's because they came from their life, their choices, their guilty conscience narrating itself through your name. When they said you couldn't be trusted, it's because they were already betraying someone. When they said you were using people, it's because they saw relationships as transactions and assumed everyone else did too. When they said you were playing victim, it's because they were terrified of their own accountability, terrified that if they stopped playing offense, they'd have to play defense. And their defense was non-existent. Every accusation was a confession. Every criticism was a self-portrait. Every warning about you was an autobiography they were too cowardly to own. And the beautiful thing, the absolutely poetic thing about projection, is that it has an expiration date. You can only blame someone else for your own behavior for so long before the pattern becomes visible, before the story stops making sense. Before people start asking why this person is so obsessed with someone they claim to want nothing to do with. Why are they still talking about you months after you stop talking about them? Why do they bring you up in conversations that have nothing to do with you? Why does your name live rent-free in their mouth when you've evicted them from your mind? It's because you're not the subject of their gossip. You're the character in their confession, and they can't stop confessing because the guilt is eating them alive from the inside out. Let's get specific. Let's talk about the types of projections you probably encountered, the flavors of confession disguised as concern. First, there's the loyalty projection, where someone who's been disloyal to everyone they've ever known accuses you of being untrustworthy. They've backstabbed their way through life, switched sides whenever convenient, sold out people for personal gain, and yet somehow, you're the one who can't be trusted. It's almost funny if it wasn't so calculated. They need everyone to doubt your loyalty, because if people trust you, they might tell you things, and those things might reveal the truth about who's really been playing both sides all along. So they plant seeds, drop hints, create doubt where none existed, all while their own loyalty is as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Then there's the emotional manipulation projection, the one where someone who's been pulling strings, manufacturing drama, and orchestrating chaos behind the scenes has the audacity to call you manipulative. They've gaslit people into questioning their own reality, twisted situations to fit their narrative, played victim and villain depending on what served them best. And yet you who barely have the energy to manage your own emotions, let alone anyone else's, you're the master manipulator in their story. It's projection so blatant, it's almost art. They see manipulation everywhere because they can't imagine a world where people act without ulterior motives, where kindness isn't a strategy, where honesty isn't a weapon, because in their world, it never is. So they assume you operate the same way. And when you don't, when you're genuinely just trying to exist without playing games, it confuses them so deeply they have to reframe it as a game they just haven't figured out yet. And then, there's the victim mentality projection, the crown jewel of psychological confession. This is where someone who's caused damage, hurt people, burned bridges, and left destruction in their wake accuses you of playing victim. The irony is so thick, it's suffocating. They've weaponized their own pain, used their trauma as a shield for their toxicity, demanded understanding while offering none, and collected sympathy like currency. Yet you who suffered in silence, who healed without broadcasting, who took accountability even when you didn't need to, you're the one playing victim. It's because watching you acknowledge pain without weaponizing it terrifies them, because it reveals that healing is a choice, and they've chosen not to make it. They've chosen to stay wounded, to stay bitter, to use their hurt as justification for hurting others. And your quiet strength is a mirror they can't stand to look into. But here's where it gets even darker, even more twisted. The gossip, the accusations, the character assassination. It's not just projection, it's preparation. They're building a narrative in advance, creating a story that will explain away whatever they're about to do or have already done. If they can convince people you're untrustworthy before you find out they betrayed you, then when you react, you're just being paranoid, just being dramatic, just proving their point. If they can paint you as manipulative before people discover they manipulated the situation, then any evidence you present looks like more manipulation. It's preemptive damage control, a narrative insurance policy. And you were so busy defending yourself from false accusations that you didn't realize they were setting up an alibi for crimes they hadn't even committed yet in your eyes, but had already committed in reality. Think about it. How many times did their accusations come right before you discovered something? Right before a truth came out? Right before the mask slipped? It's not coincidence, it's strategy. They needed people to doubt you before you had reason to doubt them. They needed your credibility destroyed before their actions came to light. They needed the narrative set so firmly that when you finally spoke your truth, It sounded like exactly what they'd been warning everyone about. It's psychological warfare, and the weapon is your own reputation turned against you, sharpened with lies, wielded with gossip, and aimed at your throat before you even knew you were in a fight. And the confession, the real confession, is in the timing, in the desperation, in the urgency with which they needed everyone to see you as the problem. Now, let's talk about what happens when the projection starts to crack, when people start noticing the patterns, when the gossip stops landing the way it used to. Because projection has a fatal flaw. It requires other people to believe it, and belief requires consistency. But projectors aren't consistent because they're not telling a true story. They're telling a useful story, and usefulness changes. So the narrative shifts. First you were manipulative, then you were crazy, then you were jealous, then you were obsessed. And wait, hold on, which one is it? The story keeps changing because it was never about what you did. It was about what they needed people to believe. And different situations required different villains. But eventually, people notice. They notice the story doesn't add up. They notice the intensity doesn't match the crime. They notice that for someone who claims to want distance, this person sure can't stop talking about you. And that's when the projection becomes a noose. Because once people see it, they can't unsee it. Once the pattern is clear, every past accusation gets re-examined. Every whispered warning gets questioned. Every dramatic retelling gets analyzed, not for what it says about you, but for what it reveals about them. And suddenly, all that gossip becomes a confession tape playing on repeat for anyone willing to listen closely. The cheating accusations reveal their infidelity. The lying accusations reveal their dishonesty. The manipulation accusations reveal their control tactics. It's all there, every crime they committed listed clearly in the accusations they made against you. And the evidence isn't in what you did, it's in what they couldn't stop talking about. Because guilty people can't help but confess, they just do it by pointing at someone else. Here's the part that probably kept you up at night, the part that made you question everything, the part that had you wondering if maybe, just maybe, they were right about you. You started seeing their accusations in your own behavior. Not because you were actually doing what they said, but because when someone insists you're something long enough, loudly enough, confidently enough, your brain starts scanning for evidence to prove them right. It's called the spotlight effect, mixed with accusation trauma. They said you were selfish, so every time you prioritized yourself, even in healthy, necessary ways, you felt guilty. They said you were manipulative, so every time you set a boundary or made a request, you questioned your motives. They said you were fake, so you started monitoring your own authenticity until you felt like a stranger to yourself. That's not evidence of their accuracy, that's evidence of their impact. And it's exactly what they wanted, you doubting yourself so thoroughly that you'd never doubt them. But let's flip the script, literally. Let's talk about what you actually did that made their projection so necessary, so urgent, so vicious. You existed authentically in a space where they needed people to perform. You healed in an environment where they needed everyone to stay broken so their dysfunction felt normal. You set boundaries in relationships where they needed unlimited access. You grew in circles where they needed everyone to stay small so they could feel big. You saw through their masks in a dynamic where everyone was supposed to play along. You were the variable they couldn't control, the mirror they couldn't crack, the truth they couldn't spin. And that was your real crime. Not manipulation or dishonesty or toxicity, but clarity, authenticity, growth, and the refusal to shrink yourself to fit their narrative. And here's the confession hidden in their gossip, the one they'll never say out loud but you need to hear. They saw something in you they killed in themselves. Maybe it was integrity. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was the ability to be alone rather than compromise values. Maybe it was self-respect. Maybe it was healing capacity. Whatever it was, they recognized it, mourned it, resented it, and decided if they couldn't have it, they'd destroy it in you, or at least convince everyone else it wasn't real. The gossip was grief. The accusations were envy. The character assassination was their suicide note for the person they could have been, should have been, chose not to be, and watching you be that person anyway was unbearable. So they tried to kill it by proxy, tried to murder your light with their words, tried to bury your truth under their lies, and called it concern, called it protection, called it anything but what it was, which was a confession of their own spiritual bankruptcy. Let's go deeper, because we're not here for surface observations. We're here for excavation. The specific things they accused you of, write them down if you haven't already. Look at the list, really look at it. Now ask yourself, who in this situation actually demonstrated these behaviors? Not in your anxious imagination, not in your trauma-soaked analysis of your own actions, but in objective reality. Who actually manipulated situations? Who actually lied consistently? Who actually used people? Who actually played victim while victimizing others? Who actually betrayed trust? Whose actions, not whose accusations, match the crimes listed? I'd bet everything the answer isn't you, the answer is them, and the proof isn't in their words about you, it's in their actions toward you, and everyone else unlucky enough to enter their orbit. Here's a pattern you probably noticed. They accused you of things that would be almost impossible for you to definitively disprove. How do you prove you're not manipulative when any defense sounds like manipulation to people primed to see it? How do you prove you're not playing victim when talking about actual harm sounds like victimhood to people invested in the abuser's narrative? How do you prove you're trustworthy to people who've been told you're a liar, when anything you say gets filtered through that lens? You can't, and that's the point. They chose accusations that were unfalsifiable, untestable, based entirely on interpretation and perception, because those accusations don't need evidence, they just need repetition. Say something enough times with enough conviction, and it becomes truth in the minds of people who don't investigate, who don't question, who just absorb and repeat. And the confession in that strategy is simple. They knew they had no real evidence, no concrete examples, no actual proof, so they trafficked in vibes and implications and the power of suggestion, because facts were never on their side. And what about the intensity, the obsessive quality of their gossip? Normal people don't spend years talking about someone they claim to dislike. Normal people move on. Normal people forget. Normal people live their own lives without needing to narrate someone else's. But these people, they couldn't stop, couldn't let go, couldn't move forward without dragging your name backward. Why? Because you weren't just a person to them, you were a symbol. You represented something they needed to defeat, an idea they needed to kill, a possibility they needed to eliminate. Maybe you represented the life they could have had if they'd made different choices. Maybe you represented the person they pretended to be before the mask became permanent. Maybe you represented freedom they traded for control, or peace they sacrificed for power, or authenticity they buried under performance. Whatever you represented, it haunted them, and the only way they knew how to exorcise that ghost was to destroy the symbol, to assassinate the character, to eliminate the evidence that another way of being was possible. But here's the thing about symbols. You can't kill them with gossip. You can only make them stronger. Every accusation that didn't stick became armor. Every lie that got exposed became a lesson. Every person who saw through their narrative became an ally. Every moment you didn't break became proof of something they couldn't comprehend, which is genuine strength. Not the performative kind, not the loud kind, not the aggressive kind, but the kind that endures, that outlasts, that survives, specifically because it doesn't need validation, doesn't need vindication, doesn't need anything from the people throwing stones. And that strength, that quiet, unshakable presence in the face of their storm, that was the final confession you forced from them without saying a word. The confession that they were never strong enough to break you, never credible enough to convince everyone, never powerful enough to write the ending they wanted. Now let's address the people who believed them, who repeated the gossip, who participated in your character assassination, either actively or passively. Here's what you need to understand. They're not all evil. Some are just lazy. Some are just cowards. Some are just so desperate to be on the winning side they'll believe anything the loudest voice says. Some genuinely thought they were helping by warning others about you. Some were manipulated just as much as you were, just in different ways. And some knew exactly what they were doing and chose cruelty anyway. But here's the part that matters for your peace. Their participation in the lie doesn't make the lie true. And eventually, when the projection becomes undeniable, when the patterns become clear, when the truth comes out the way truth always does, those people will have a choice. Admit they were wrong, or double down on the lie. And that choice? That will reveal who they actually are, not who they claim to be when it was convenient. The confession in the gossip is complete when you realize they told everyone exactly who they were. They just used your name. They confessed to manipulation by accusing you of it. They confessed to dishonesty by questioning yours. They confessed to toxicity by labeling you toxic. They confessed to selfishness by calling you selfish. They confessed to playing victim by accusing you of it. They wrote their entire autobiography in the margins of your life story. And if you read it right, if you see it clearly, you'll realize the gossip was never about you. It was always, always about them. And the tragedy, the absolute tragedy, is they'll never admit it. They'll never take accountability. They'll never apologize. They'll never acknowledge that every word they spoke against you was a mirror they were too terrified to look into. So what do you do with this realization, with this clarity, with this confirmation that you're not crazy, you were just surrounded by people confessing their crimes while prosecuting you for existing? You do nothing. Absolutely nothing. You don't confront. You don't explain. You don't defend. You don't try to make them see what they're determined to stay blind to. You simply exist in your truth, live your life, heal your wounds, and let their confession stand on its own. Because the beautiful thing about projection is it's self-exposing. Give it time. Give it space. Give it room to breathe and repeat and contradict itself. And eventually, anyone paying attention will see exactly what you see, which is people so desperate to avoid their own reflection, they created a whole fictional character and called it you.